Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This file is being recorded for the July 2022 edition of Socialism for All, and it's an audiobook and discussion of Against Vulgarizing the Slogan of Self-Criticism by Stalin from 1928. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe, and consider supporting on Patreon at patreon.com/socialismforall. There's a link to Patreon in the video description. So, the source for this text is Joseph Stalin's Works, Volume 11, January 1928 to March 1929. The publisher is Foreign Languages Publishing House, Moscow, 1954. HTML transcription and markup by Salil Sen for Marxist's Internet Archive, 2008. And it's in the public domain at the Marxist's Internet Archive, marxists.org. Thanks as usual to MIA for hosting this and thousands of other free Marxist texts. So, let's get into the audiobook. The slogan of self-criticism must not be regarded as something temporary and transient. Self-criticism is a specific method, a Bolshevik method, of training the forces of the party and of the working class generally in the spirit of revolutionary development. Marx himself spoke of self-criticism as a method of strengthening the proletarian revolution. See the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. As to self-criticism in our party, its beginnings date back to the first appearance of Bolshevism in our country, to its very inception as a specific revolutionary trend in the working class movement. We know that as early as the spring of 1904, when Bolshevism was not yet an independent political party, but worked together with the Mensheviks within a single social democratic Marxist party, we know that Lenin was already calling upon the party to undertake, quote, self-criticism and ruthless exposure of its own shortcomings, unquote. Here is what Lenin wrote in his pamphlet, One Step Forward, Two Steps Back. Quote, they, i.e. the opponents of the Marxists, gloat and grimace over our controversies, and of course they will try to pick isolated passages from my pamphlet, which deals with the defects and shortcomings of our party, and to use them for their own ends. The Russian Social Democrats are already steeled enough in battle not to be perturbed by these pinpricks, and to continue, in spite of them, their work of self-criticism and ruthless exposure of their own shortcomings, which will unquestionably and inevitably be overcome as the working class movement grows. As for those gentlemen, our opponents, let them try to give us a picture of the true state of affairs in their own, quote, parties, even remotely approximating that given by the minutes of our Second Congress, unquote. Therefore, those comrades are absolutely wrong who think that self-criticism is a passing phenomenon, a fashion which is bound speedily to go out of existence as every fashion usually does. Actually, self-criticism is an indispensable and permanent weapon in the arsenal of Bolshevism, one that is intimately linked with the very nature of Bolshevism, with its revolutionary spirit. It is sometimes said that self-criticism is something that is good for a party which has not yet come to power and has, quote, nothing to lose, but that it is dangerous and harmful to a party which has already come to power, which is surrounded by hostile forces, and against which an exposure of its weaknesses may be exploited by its enemies. That is not true. It is quite untrue. On the contrary, just because Bolshevism has come to power, just because Bolsheviks may become conceited owing to the successes of our work of construction, just because Bolsheviks may fail to observe their weaknesses, and thus make things easier for their enemies, for these very reasons, self-criticism is particularly needed now, after the assumption of power. Quick comment there. I would say that no party ever has nothing to lose. The very fact that people have come together, even in a preliminary way, to start to organize is an accomplishment, however small. And really, at any stage, you always have something to lose. However, it's the nature of proletarian revolutions to be very self-critical and not to proceed linearly. Continuing. The purpose of self-criticism being to disclose and eliminate our errors and weaknesses, is it not clear that in the conditions of the dictatorship of the proletariat, it can only facilitate Bolshevism's fight against the enemies of the working class? Lenin took into account these specific features of the situation which had arisen after the Bolsheviks had seized power, when, in April and May 1920, he wrote in his pamphlet, Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder, quote, the attitude of a political party towards its own mistakes is one of the most important and surest ways of judging how serious the party is, and how it in practice fulfills its obligations towards its class and the toiling masses. Frankly admitting a mistake, ascertaining the reasons for it, analyzing the circumstances which gave rise to it, and thoroughly discussing the means of correcting it. That is the earmark of a serious party. That is the way it should perform its duties. That is the way it should educate and train the class and then the masses." Unquote. Lenin was 1,000 times right when he said at the 11th Party Congress in March 1922, quote, "The proletariat is not afraid to admit that this or that thing has succeeded splendidly in its revolution, and this or that thing has not succeeded. All revolutionary parties which have hitherto perished did so because they grew conceited, failed to see where their strength lay, and feared to speak of their weaknesses. But we shall not perish, for we do not fear to speak of our weaknesses, and shall learn to overcome them." Unquote. There is only one conclusion, that without self-criticism, there can be no proper education of the party, the class, and the masses, and that without proper education of the party, the class, and the masses, there can be no Bolshevism. Why has the slogan of self-criticism acquired special importance just now, at this particular moment of history in 1928? Because the growing acuteness of class relations, both in the internal and external spheres, is more glaringly evident now than it was a year or two ago. Because the subversive activities of the class enemies of the Soviet government, who are utilizing our weaknesses, our errors, against the working class of our country, are more glaringly evident now than they were a year or two ago. Because we cannot and must not allow the lessons of the Shakti affair and the procurement maneuvers of the capitalist elements in the countryside, coupled with our mistakes in planning, to go unheeded. If we want to strengthen the revolution and meet our enemies fully prepared, we must rid ourselves as quickly as possible of our errors and weaknesses, as disclosed by the Shakti affair and the grain procurement difficulties. If we do not want to be caught unawares by all sorts of surprises and accidents to the joy of the enemies of the working class, we must disclose as quickly as possible those errors and weaknesses of ours, which have not yet been disclosed but which undoubtedly exist. If we are tardy in this, we shall be facilitating the work of our enemies and aggravating our weaknesses and errors. But all this will be impossible if self-criticism is not developed and stimulated, if the vast masses of the working class and peasantry are not drawn into the work of bringing to light and eliminating our weaknesses and errors. The April plenum of the CC and CCC was therefore quite right when it said in its resolution on the Shakti affair, quote, "The chief condition for the successful accomplishment of all the indicated measures is the effective implementation of the slogan of self-criticism issued by the 15th Congress." Unquote. But in order to develop self-criticism, we must first overcome a number of obstacles standing in the way of the party. These include the cultural backwardness of the masses, the inadequate cultural forces of the proletarian vanguard, our conservatism, our, quote, "communist vainglory," and so on. But one of the most serious obstacles, if not the most serious of all, is the bureaucracy of our apparatus. I am referring to the bureaucratic elements to be found in our party, government, trade union, cooperative, and all other organizations. I am referring to the bureaucratic elements who batten on our weaknesses and errors, who fear like the plague all criticism by the masses, all control by the masses, and who hinder us in developing self-criticism and ridding ourselves of our weaknesses and errors. Bureaucracy in our organizations must not be regarded merely as routine and red tape. Bureaucracy is a manifestation of bourgeois influence on our organizations. Lenin was right when he said, quote, "We must realize that the fight against bureaucracy is an absolutely essential one, and that it is just as complicated as the fight against the petty bourgeois elemental forces. Bureaucracy in our state system has become a malady of such gravity that it is spoken of in our party program, and that is because it is connected with these petty bourgeois elemental forces and their wide dispersion." Unquote. With all the more persistence, therefore, must the struggle against bureaucracy in our organizations be waged, if we really want to develop self-criticism and rid ourselves of the maladies in our constructive work. With all the more persistence must we rouse the vast masses of the workers and peasants to the task of criticism from below, of control from below, as the principal antidote to bureaucracy. Lenin was right when he said, quote, "If we want to combat bureaucracy, we must enlist the cooperation of the rank and file, for what other way is there of putting an end to bureaucracy than by enlisting the cooperation of the workers and peasants?" Unquote. But in order to enlist the cooperation of the vast masses, we must develop proletarian democracy in all the mass organizations of the working class, and primarily within the party itself. Failing this, self-criticism will be nothing, an empty thing, a mere word. It is not just any kind of self-criticism that we need. We need such self-criticism as will raise the cultural level of the working class, enhance its fighting spirit, fortify its faith in victory, augment its strength, and help it to become the real master of the country. Some say that once there is self-criticism, we do not need labor discipline. We can stop working and give ourselves over to prattling a little about everything. That would not be self-criticism, but an insult to the working class. Self-criticism is needed not in order to shatter labor discipline, but to strengthen it, in order that labor discipline may become conscious discipline, capable of withstanding petty bourgeois slackness. Others say that once there is self-criticism, we no longer need leadership. We can abandon the helm and let things take their natural course, so to speak. That would not be self-criticism, but a disgrace. Self-criticism is needed not in order to relax leadership, but to strengthen it, in order to convert it from leadership on paper and of little authority into vigorous and really authoritative leadership. But there is another kind of self-criticism, one that tends to destroy the party spirit, to discredit the Soviet regime, to weaken our work of construction, to corrupt our economic cadres, to disarm the working class, and to foster talk of degeneration. It was just this kind of, quote, self-criticism that the Trotsky opposition was urging upon us only recently. It goes without saying that the party has nothing in common with such, quote, self-criticism. It goes without saying that the party will combat such self-criticism with might and main. A strict distinction must be drawn between this, quote, self-criticism, which is alien to us, destructive and anti-Bolshevik, and our Bolshevik self-criticism, the object of which is to promote the party spirit, to consolidate the Soviet regime, to improve our constructive work, to strengthen our economic cadres, to arm the working class. Our campaign for intensifying self-criticism began only a few months ago. We have not yet the necessary data for a review of the first results of the campaign, but it may already be said that the campaign is beginning to yield beneficial fruits. It cannot be denied that the tide of self-criticism is beginning to mount and spread, extending to ever larger sections of the working class and drawing them into the work of socialist construction. This is borne out, if only by such facts as the revival of the production conferences and the temporary control commissions. True, there are still attempts to pigeonhole well-founded and verified recommendations of the production conferences and temporary control commissions. Such attempts must be fought with the utmost determination, for their purpose is to discourage the workers from self-criticism. But there is scarcely reason to doubt that such bureaucratic attempts will be swept away completely by the mounting tide of self-criticism. Nor can it be denied that as a result of self-criticism, our business executives are beginning to smarten up, to become more vigilant, to approach questions of economic leadership more seriously, while our party, Soviet, trade union, and all other personnel are becoming more sensitive and responsive to the requirements of the masses. True, it cannot be said that inter-party democracy and working-class democracy generally are already fully established in the mass organizations of the working class, but there is no reason to doubt that further advances will be made in this field as the campaign unfolds. Nor can it be denied that, as a result of self-criticism, our press has become more lively and vigorous, while such detachments of our press workers as the Organization of Worker and Village Correspondents are already becoming a weighty political force. True, our press still continues at times to skate on the surface. It has not yet learned to pass from individual critical remarks to deeper criticism, and from deep criticism to drawing general conclusions from the results of criticism, and making plain what achievements have been attained in our constructive work as a result of criticism. But it can scarcely be doubted that advances will be made in this field as the campaign goes on. However, along with these good aspects of our campaign, it is necessary to note some bad aspects. I'm referring to those distortions of the slogan of self-criticism which are already occurring at the beginning of the campaign, and which, if they are not resisted at once, may give rise to the danger of self-criticism being vulgarized. 1. It must be observed in the first place that a number of press periodicals are betraying a tendency to transplant the campaign from the field of businesslike criticisms of shortcomings in our socialist construction to the field of ostentatious outcries against excesses in private life. This may seem incredible, but unfortunately it is a fact. Take the newspaper of La Struda, for example, organ of the Irkutsk Okrug Party Committee and Okrug Soviet Executive Committee, number 128. There you will find a whole page peppered all over with ostentatious slogans, such as sexual promiscuity, a bourgeois vice, one glass leads to another, own cottage calls for own cow, double bed bandits, a shot that misfired, and so on and so forth. What, one asks, can there be in common between these, quote, critical shrieks, which are worthy of Berchovka, footnote, a bourgeois newspaper founded in St. Petersburg in 1880, the Stock Exchange News. Its unscrupulousness and venality made its name a byword. At the end of October 1917, it was shut down by the Revolutionary Military Committee of the Petrograd Soviet. And Bolshevik self-criticism, the purpose of which is to improve our socialist construction. It is very possible that the author of these ostentatious items is a communist. It is possible that he is burning with hatred of the class enemies of the Soviet regime, but that he is straying from the right path, that he is vulgarizing the slogan of self-criticism, and that his voice is the voice not of our class, of that there cannot be any doubt. 2. It must be observed further that even those organs of the press which, generally speaking, are not devoid of the ability to criticize correctly, that even they are sometimes inclined to criticize for criticism's sake, turning criticism into a sport, into sensation-mongering. Take Komsomolskaya Pravda, for example. Everyone knows the services rendered by Komsomolskaya Pravda in stimulating self-criticism. But take the last issues of this paper, and look at its, quote, criticism of the leaders of the All-Union Central Council of Trade Unions, a whole series of impermissible caricatures on the subject. Who, one asks, needs criticism of this kind, and what effect can it have except to discredit the slogan of self-criticism? What is the use of such criticism? Looked at, of course, from the standpoint of the interests of our socialist construction, and not of cheap sensation-mongering, designed to give the Philistines something to chuckle over. Of course, all forms of arms are required for self-criticism, including the light cavalry. But does this mean that the light cavalry must be turned into light-minded cavalry? 3. It must be observed, lastly, that there is a definite tendency on the part of a number of our organizations to turn self-criticism into a witch hunt against our business executives, into an attempt to discredit them in the eyes of the working class. It is a fact that certain local organizations in the Ukraine and Central Russia have started a regular witch hunt against some of our best business executives, whose only fault is that they are not 100% immune from error. How else are we to understand the decisions of the local organizations to remove these executives from their posts? Decisions which have no binding force whatever, and which are obviously designed to discredit them. How else are we to understand the fact that these executives are criticized, but are given no opportunity to answer the criticism? When did we begin to pass off a Shemyaka court as self-criticism? Footnote, Shemyaka court meant an unjust court. It's from an ancient Russian story about a judge named Shemyaka. Continuing. Of course, we cannot demand that criticism should be 100% correct. If the criticism comes from below, we must not ignore it, even if it is only 5 or 10% correct. All that is true. But does this mean that we must demand that business executives should be 100% immune from error? Is there anyone in creation who is immune from error 100%? Is it so hard to understand that it takes years and years to train our economic cadres, and that our attitude towards them must be one of the utmost consideration and solicitude? Is it so hard to understand that we need self-criticism not for the sake of a witch hunt against our economic cadres, but in order to improve and perfect them? Criticize the shortcomings of our constructive work, but do not vulgarize the slogan of self-criticism. Do not turn it into a medium for ostentatious exercises on such themes as double-bed bandits, a shot that misfired, and so on. Criticize the shortcomings in our constructive work, but do not discredit the slogan of self-criticism, and do not turn it into a means of cooking up cheap sensations. Criticize the shortcomings in our constructive work, but do not pervert the slogan of self-criticism, and do not turn it into a weapon for witch hunts against our business or any other executives. And the chief thing, do not substitute for mass criticism from below critical fireworks from above. Let the working class masses come into it and display their creative initiative in correcting our shortcomings and in improving our constructive work. Signed, J. Stalin, Pravda number 146, June 26, 1928. And that's the end of the audiobook. So what can we take from this? First of all, overall, I would say that I thought that this was very clear, direct, and to the point, as most of Stalin's work is, characteristically so, in other words, and Again, I think it's pretty clear on first reading, but let's go over it anyway. So self-criticism is something inherent to the Bolshevik method, of the communist method, etc. Marx spoke of it, and in fact, to quote from the 18th Brumaire, which Stalin referenced here, here's the paragraph. I'm actually working on this audiobook now, but it's kind of long. It'll probably be about 3 hours, so it'll be up in another week or two. Here's the quote. Bourgeois revolutions, like those of the 18th century, storm more swiftly from success to success. Their dramatic effects outdo each other. Men and things seem set in sparkling diamonds. Ecstasy is the order of the day, but they are short-lived. Soon they have reached their zenith, and a long Katzenjammer takes hold of society before it learns to assimilate the results of its storm and stress period soberly. On the other hand, proletarian revolutions, like those of the 19th century, constantly criticize themselves, constantly interrupt themselves in their own course, return to the apparently accomplished in order to begin anew. They deride with cruel thoroughness the half-measures, weaknesses, and paltriness of their first attempts, seem to throw down their opponents only so the latter may draw new strength from the earth and rise before them again more gigantic than ever, recoil constantly from the indefinite colossalness of their own goals until a solution is created which makes all turning back impossible, and the conditions themselves call out, "Here is the rose, here dance." So Marx there doesn't get into all the reasons for why that is, but he does lay it out that that tends to be the way it goes when the working class sets about a revolutionary task. And indeed, later socialists continued on this theme. There is quite a lot written about self-criticism. Stalin quotes Lenin from One Step Forward, Two Steps Back, which is not on the channel yet. Again, probably will be this month, as well as Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder, which is on the channel currently, and other works, addresses of party congresses and so forth. It's an important topic because you have to have this kind of constructive criticism moving forward, or it's just going to be complete chaos. People are going to be going in all different directions, repeating mistakes without learning from them, etc. So Stalin underlines that self-criticism, there's nothing wrong with it. People who don't understand this method, enemies of the working class, may try to seize upon it and say, look, the communists are fighting with each other. You see this all the time, even today on social media, like the right will be like, look at the left, eating itself or whatever. They don't understand this process. This is the process. They should be just as afraid of when we fight with each other as when we don't. Maybe even more so, because it means that we are moving forward through our process by doing that. Again, as long as it is constructive and not just, petty squabbling. So, again, returning to the title, Against Vulgarizing, the slogan of self-criticism, Stalin draws clear lines between what is constructive self-criticism, which actually builds strength, inspires confidence, arms the working class with knowledge, that on the one side, and then with vulgarized self-criticism on the other. And there's a few examples of using criticism to turn what may be simple mistakes that anybody would make into completely career-discrediting witch hunts, or to take complaints which are more petty or matters of personal taste and try to use the slogan of self-criticism to put these complaints and attacks on the level of trying to analyze things that could be impairing socialist construction. That's no good. Or the media trying to take self-criticism to basically what we would call today, clickbait, selling newspapers, doing, as Stalin called, sensation mongering. So that's not really constructive to the overall process of building the party, educating the masses, building socialism. So ultimately, Stalin argues for letting the working masses come into it and display their creative initiative in correcting our shortcomings and improving our constructive work, having self-criticism, constructive, focused, actually greater good-oriented self-criticism be something that everybody participates in, because in this way, errors will be reduced, and you give the enemies of the working class and the enemies of socialist construction fewer opportunities for attack. You close up your vulnerabilities, and everybody winds up better off in the socialist world. One thing I would like to note before closing out these comments is there's been an ongoing struggle in the US left in particular against sort of right-wing usurping or co-opting of the name of socialism, Marxism-Leninism as of late. It often is associated with what has become known as patriotic socialism, PATSOCs. These are basically people who veer into right populism. They make all kinds of right opportunist errors and just all sorts of right deviations. I mean, up to and including, I would say, just sidling up directly to borderline fascists and fascists. And it seems like a lot of this effort is explicitly to take away socialism as a possibility by confusing people as to what it even means. So one of the ways that they go about this is by repeatedly proclaiming that socialism and communism are conservative movements. No, they're revolutionary movements. We're actually trying to abolish many of the outdated functions and features of capitalist society and take a quantum leap forward from the present, and then after having made that quantum leap, continue to work into the future, not the past, which is the entire idea of conservatism. Let me just quote, I think, a relevant passage here in Against Vulgarizing, the Slogan of Self-Criticism. Quote, "But in order to develop self-criticism, we must first overcome a number of obstacles standing in the way of the party. These include the cultural backwardness of the masses, the inadequate cultural forces of the proletarian vanguard, our conservatism, our communist vainglory, and so on, as well as bureaucracy." But note here that cultural backwardness and conservatism are, in Stalin's opinion, at least at that time, and I would say that there's no significant difference in the context between then and now with regard to self-criticism and the general usefulness to a communist movement, or the, their ability to hinder a communist movement. I think that basically has stayed the same from then to now. Conservatism was considered a major obstacle. So take note, people who want to go on about communism is conservative. No, communism is revolutionary, quite the opposite. Anyway, it's amazing that we have to have this discussion, but that just shows the extent of the right-wing infiltration into this movement. They are threatened by this movement, and they need to prevent an actually functional socialist movement from emerging and trying to confuse people as to its basic meaning, posing as these, distorted versions of socialists themselves seems to be one of the tactics that they're taking. Don't be fooled by the fakers. All right, I'm going to leave it there. What do you think? Leave a question or comment below. We'll continue the discussion in the comment section as always. Otherwise, thanks for listening. And thanks to the current patrons whose names are on the screen. If you'd like to get your name on the screen, head to patreon.com/socialismforall. We don't run ads on this channel, so the patron support is vital and very much appreciated. You can sign up for as little as $2 a month or more. Every donation is encouraging. They're also materially helpful, and they've helped me to spend a lot more time creating content for this channel than I would have been able to do without that support. So thank you very much. Also, after the content's been created, engagement counts. Like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment, even if it's thanks or good video. All of that helps to boost the channel and the videos in the YouTube algorithm, and helps more people to stumble across this content in the future. The audience has been expanding. That's a great thing, because capitalism's in crisis, and we need to build a fighting movement of working people against the rich and bigoted so that we can move forward out of the horrible inequalities and injustices of capitalism. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next video.